Revelation 20 and 5 over here. It says, but the rest of the dead live not again until the 1,000 years were finished. This is the first resurrection. So obviously it's talking about in the kingdom. Now the dead over here is actually talking about the other nations, such as the Chinese, the Japanese, the Hamites, and live again, meaning after 1,000 years of slavery, they're going to go back to their land. They're going to inherit their land, but they're still going to serve us as slaves, but at least they're going to be in their land. They're going to have their land once again. But for that 1,000 years of slavery, they're going to be in hardcore slavery underneath us. That term, the dead, you can find that in Isaiah, the 14th chapter, the 9th verse, which is one of the best examples that proves this. It says, hell from beneath is moved for thee to meet thee at thy coming. This D is talking about Esau, who's in power right now, the so-called white man. Hell meaning destruction. All right. It says, it stirreth up the dead for thee. Now, do you know when you go into Hebrew, the term the dead here, which I have over here, from the Hebrew word rapah yum, it says feeble or weak. Now, in comparison to Esau, which he's the main power right now, these other nations are feeble and weak. So when the scripture says, hell from beneath is moved for thee to meet thee at thy coming, it stirreth up the dead for thee. Meaning all the other nations now are rising up against Esau. And you see that in the news today. You see that with the Chinese, the Japanese, well, actually the Chinese, more so the Japanese, and the Arab nations. They're rising up against the so-called white man, you know, and they're also boasting that they have the missiles, and they're not hesitant to use those missiles against the so-called white man, which they eventually will do. All right, so this is the hell that's from beneath, that's being stirred up to meet thee. This D is talking about the so-called white man, all right, who is in the scriptures is known as the king of Babylon. The king of Babylon right now is the so-called white man, his power structure. Okay, so there you see that it says it stirreth up the dead for thee. So another term for the other nations is the dead, meaning in comparison to Esau, they're the weak, they're the feeble. Let's go back again and take a look at this definition. Rapah Aryam. What does it say? Flaccid, feeble, weak. All right, so it's not actually dead or physically dead. It's dead meaning they don't have as much power as the one that's oppressing them, which happens to be in this time, which happens to be the so-called white man. The other nations at one time, they're flaccid, they were weak, and they were feeble in comparison to the so-called white man. But now they have the power, or as much power as the so-called white man. They're not willing, and they're willing to use that power against him. This is what the scripture means. Hell from beneath is moved for thee to meet thee at thy coming. It stirreth up the dead for thee, because eventually all these other weaker nations are going to shoot missiles against Esau and destroy his system, destroy his kingdom. Even all the chief ones of the earth, right, the nations, the other nations, it have raised up from their thrones all the kings of the nations. See? So that's the term the dead here, meaning all the kings of the other nations. And you see that in the news today. So when you go back to Revelation 20 and 5, it says, but the rest of the dead. So now you know what this term, the dead, mean. The rest of the other nations live not again until the 1,000 years were finished. Because after 1,000 years of slavery, which they're going to serve us, they're going to go back to their land, and they're going to have, for lack of a better term, their own little system. But they're still going to be slaves to us.
Okay, but start at the 6th verse. Blessed and holy is he that have part in the first resurrection. On such the second death hath no power, but they shall be priests and the Most High, of the Most High, and of YAHAWASHI, and shall reign with him 1,000 years. Now that first resurrection is talking about all of Israel. But they're going to come, the Most High is going to save Israel by 1/3, then he's going to bring the other 2/3 back. Okay? So that's what that's talking about.